Welcome to the Death, Taxes and Change podcast, the podcast where the certain things in life are not as certain as you may think. And there's a big honor for us today here at the Death, Taxes and Change podcast for Paul and I to have with us as guest Mr. Cabanac and Mr. Kanthan Pillay from the South African or the Capitalist Party of South Africa. Gents, welcome here today.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
It's awesome having you guys here. So, guys, thank you for tuning into this special live podcast. And I think we're going to quickly just start off with a brief introduction. Kanthan, if you can just introduce yourselves to our listeners, just give a brief background of who you are.
Right. My name is Cabanac. I co-founded the Renegade Report podcast, and I'm the co-founder of the Capitalist Party of South Africa. I'm actually an immigrant, if that matters. Moved here when I was very young, grew up on a farm, and now I do law, or pretend to do it, but people pay me for it. And I run the podcast and now a political party as well.
And my name is Kanthan Pillay, and I've spent most of my life working in a range of fields, but nearly all of them have centered on media to some extent. But at various stages, I ran ETV News when it became really big. I was managing editor of the Cape Times when it made a profit for the first time ever. I ran a radio station called YFM for 10 years, during which time it hit its profit forecasts every single year without fail. I've worked as a computer scientist in the island of Sardinia, and I've also worked as a computer scientist at Princeton University, which is where I studied after I left the country with the state of emergency in 1986. Came back in 94 and have been here pretty much ever since.
So, Kanthan, I'm going to start with you, and then, Roman, if you can just answer the same question. We're here today, obviously, due to the South African Capitalist Party, a brainchild of you guys and a group of other people who thought with you and felt with you and brought this thing to life. The question now, I think the first question that we should ask is, we know what the name is, but what is this party? Can you tell us more? What is the South African Capitalist Party in essence? What do you guys stand for? What is it that you fight for? And what is the change that you want to bring to South Africa?
You want to go first? Okay, I'll go. Well, essentially, the difference between us and most other political parties is nearly every other political party gets there on the basis of promising what they're going to do. We wanting to get in for the first time as a party that's founded on principles, and we've got 10 principles that we put down. If you really want to drill down into them, they're, I think, what we would call classically liberal principles. It's individual freedom, freedom of speech, absolute property rights, the individual above all else, international trade that's based on enlightened self-interest. We're very firm on gun rights. We're very firm on every individual right, in fact. Roman, you want to pick up?
Right, and we also care deeply that people are able to protect their rights from the state and from others. And essentially, the party is basically about making the individual valuable again. We found that politics has become deeply binary along collective grounds. We want to make the individual valuable.
So let's perhaps just get to the branding part of the party, which I think has been a major success, if I have to say so myself, from my side at least, that, the purple cow, people remember it. Purple is a unique color in South African politics. How did you firstly get to that point? I know you have discussed it in previous podcasts and videos, but perhaps to the people who haven't heard it, why exactly the purple cow?
Well, maybe I should pick up that one. When Roman and I first had conversations at that stage, the branding for the party was really a fanfold of our currency notes, with all of the animals kind of spread out. And my wife is Dr. Sarah Britton, who is a ad industry strategist. And for a number of years, she was with Young and Rubicam, moved out, started her own agency, was then bought out by Y&R, moved back in there. And then Y&R closed shop in South Africa around about the beginning of last year. And at that point, she came to me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, Roman and Neo and I are starting a political party." And she took a look at the branding and said, "No, this is absolute rubbish." And and she said, essentially, what you need to do is to have something that is completely going to stand out on the ballot paper, a moment of truth thing, so that no one can make a mistake as to what it is. And there's a very famous book called The Purple Cow, written by Seth Godin, who's a fairly significant player in the ad industry. And so the purple cow just kind of made sense because, firstly, cattle is a symbol of wealth in sub-Saharan Africa, and we're capitalists. It represents a bull market from the JSE point of view, and purple is the color of prosperity.
So if I can perhaps just play a quick game with you guys. I'm just going to, I think everybody knows about your 10 principles and the 10 policy positions that you've broadly taken, but if we can just quickly run through them, I'm just going to mention one responsibility or one task that a lot of people assume should be at government level, and then just how the Purple Cow or how the Capitalist Party would essentially deal with it or approach it. So if we look at healthcare, what is your policy position on healthcare?
I think a lot of our positions all point in the same direction, which is the private sector can nearly always do just about anything better than government can. And we're very firm on the idea of vouchers. In fact, Roman has spoken extensively around the idea of voucherizing the education system and essentially privatizing the entire thing. I take a very similar approach in terms of healthcare. The whole idea is right now that if you look at the entry-level package for most medical aid schemes, it's about 800 Rand a month per person, which gives you pretty comprehensive coverage, including unlimited access to GPs, hospital cover, dental care, and all of those things. If you shut down the entire public health system and just simply took that money and put it in the hands of everyone out there who's providing medical aid, on condition that they provided that very basic level of services, the country would immediately be better off. Roman, you want to add to that?
No, I fully echo that. I'm a type of person who would want to privatize absolutely everything, including most of the state. And also, the voucherization is also putting the individual first. It's giving the choice back to the individual. What we are against is the government controlling education, land, health, and things like that. Because essentially what happens is those people become serfs to the state and have very little agency.
And the voucher system can obviously broadly be applied to something like education as well, which would work similarly in that sense.
Well, it's even easier in education because the costs are relatively fixed. So if you, I think we did the calculations. If you shut down the Department of Education and divided that amount by every person in public schooling, they would get roughly 16,000 Rand a year. 20,000 Rand a year.
Which is basically school fees at the moment.
Yeah, per person. So, like, for example, like a Spark school, which is a private school, I think they charge 21,000 Rand a year for very good quality education.
So there's no reason for South Africans who can't afford your, super expensive Crawford colleges or Maragons to not also have the same quality education.
Well, in fact, we've been seeing a very interesting thing where there have been teachers who become disillusioned with the whole public education system, and they've been setting up schools in the townships, and they charge something like about 1,000 Rand a month per pupil. But these are very good teachers who've basically decided that they are heartful of what's going on in public education, and they've essentially started these schools, and those schools are getting traction, and they actually turning out incredible results. So, you're talking in the region of around about 12,000 Rand a year for your kid to actually have to go to a school where you can actually fire the school if they're not performing. I think that stuff is brilliant.
But there's also remember, there's a man called James Toohey who wrote a book a couple of years ago, and for the life of me, I can't remember it, but it's like private education in the poorest nations in the world. So in Liberia, for example, private education outstrips public education, whereby the parents pay between $30 to $40 a term for the school. And the outcomes have been much greater. It's been replicated in Angola, in India, and many other places in the world which we would consider developing. But parents have actively chosen to go to these private schools, which don't cost that much money because there's actually so much competition.
So if we can maybe move on to the next point, which I think you guys have obviously come out with a very strong point on, and that is guns and the right of every person to sort of arm themselves responsibly and so forth. Maybe we should speak about that. The reason why I'm saying that is because we see South Africa attempting to move closer and closer to what the UK government is doing in certain senses, maybe in terms of medical care and stuff like that. So they sort of wanted this, well, I can probably call it soft European socialism, if that's fair. Probably it's not, but let's call it that for the moment. And then we get to a point where in London you can't even walk around with a knife, and you guys come out and sort of say strongly, listening, we support the right of people to carry legal firearms or to own legal firearms. Can you maybe explain your position? Why was that your thinking, and why do you feel strongly about that?
Well, how do you defend your rights? Especially your right to life, your right to property, and various other rights. You defend them by being the protector of those rights. And so a gun is a tool to use to defend rights, generally speaking. And it is our view that people who are competent to carry a gun, they should take the exam, they should do training at the range, they should be able to carry those guns, concealed carry in public. Because we understand that the South African Police Service can't fulfill their constitutional mandate. They've admitted that in court, and we live in an extremely violent society. So the rich have private security who have guns, but what do the middle class and the poor do? Nothing at the moment. So in fact, there's about 4 million people with unlicensed firearms, not because they are criminals, but because they can't actually afford to meet the criteria of firearm ownership. It's very onerous. So we just want to make those people legal firearm owners as well.
So obviously this is currently a normative discussion. I think the idea behind it is pure and can be motivated. But do you think practically in terms of policy, you guys will come to the table and say this is the way in which we're going to license those 4 million people? Or is that sort of something that you want to work towards in the future? Or do you guys have a specific policy?
That kind of, one particular piece of the puzzle. I mean, from my side, the question of guns, I myself don't carry a gun, which again surprises many people because they say, so why are you pushing so strongly for gun rights? Well, firstly, it is a question of personal freedom, which of course is entrenched in our principles. But then I have 3 daughters, and my eldest daughter works as an audio engineer, and she travels to gigs quite late at night. And the single source of terror for me is that she ends up in the middle of nowhere, needing to change a tire in the middle of the night. And what happens if she gets accosted? Because there is no one around. And if she's in a position to actually defend herself with a firearm, that is immediately going to give me a significant chunk of peace of mind, simply because this is a violent society that we happen to live in. The other thing, of course, is that if we look at the structure of our society right now, we don't trust our government to provide us with healthcare. We don't trust them to provide us with education. We don't trust them to provide us with old age care. We don't trust them to provide us with keeping the lights on. But we're willing to turn around and say they should be the only people who have legal guns in this country. It's a bit of an absurdity. So there's some very rational thought processes that are driving this. And I'm very clear that probably the single incentive for us in getting guns actually legalized into the hands of people to defend themselves is the fact that the government wants to take it away.
So getting to perhaps a bit difficult questions then, just what are your policies and what do you think about them? So come 8 May, we have the election, the ZACP does well, you get your 10 or 13 seats in parliament. What do you do then? What's the first thing that your party will do when you get to parliament?
We're going to ask for a 34% reduction in parliamentarian salaries, because that's the amount of the budget that is taken to pay salaries like us, like those. And then when that fails, obviously it will, because a lot of people in Parliament love their salaries. We do intend to go on various portfolio committees with a very high attendance record and ensure that laws that reduce freedom are fought against, and ensure that laws that are very expensive or impractical, we are able to provide a solution that is far cheaper, more simple, and effective to implement.
Well, in fact, we've got those 10 plans that you'll see up on our website. And the trick around those 10 plans is that all of those, I think about 80% of them can be implemented at practically zero cost, almost immediately. And so I won't waste time going into that right now. But I think the single biggest place where we hope to make a difference is actually watching the financials in the portfolio committee, because government actually doesn't have a clue about what things cost and how money should be spent. And so when you're doing very simple things like needing to take a look at what it would cost to, let's say, increase the number of schools that are being built, prices get inflated. We know this quite drastically. And the idea is that we'll sit and go through every single number with a fine-tooth comb. And wherever it's very clear to us that they don't know what they're talking about, we're going to be coming out and saying, actually, you need to fix these numbers. So it's really a question of ultimately government's job in Parliament is spending our money, and we're just going to make sure that we're keeping an eye on how that's done.
And have you given any thought into how you'll approach, because obviously, so let's say you're successful as you'd like to be, and I think most of us hope you will be. Now you have these 10 seats in Parliament, and I think, and we all suspect that coalition politics will become increasingly more important in the future, especially perhaps in the next election in the coming 5 years. How do you approach coalition politics? Who do you perhaps see as possible allies, or who do you see as people who you can meet somewhere halfway to try to, have a pragmatic position on certain things in the country?
I think that's very simple. If it fits within our principles and it increases freedom and it increases rights to more people, we will gladly work with anyone who does that, be it a minority party or even the ANC itself, if they have a policy that is cheap, simple, and effective and can increase the wealth of the country, we will support them in that. So our principles ultimately will guide us on this.
I have an interesting question, which comes from, Sandel wrote a lot about this, one of the recent ethicists. The thing is that he says these classic liberal principles and values tend to be very popular in Western Europe and in countries with a Western European influence, as we in South Africa obviously do. We can argue with that, but it is essentially true. The problem, he says, is that people who tend to want these freedoms, these individual freedoms, are people who can necessarily sustain themselves, so people who can govern themselves. And probably in South Africa, the majority of people are not necessarily prepared to do their own budgets, to do their own medical administration and stuff like that, which leads to a question, maybe a harsher question, but I think that's a question that's being raised to the Capitalist Party. Currently, the government is pretending like it's basically your parents and looking after you, this literally governing small, minute things which you should essentially be responsible for yourself. But many South Africans think that maybe a lot of South Africans aren't prepared to take care of themselves. Do you guys think that in the future this is something that can be addressed by the influence that your party can have, or how do you address that issue?
I think there's something that Roman and I both agree upon, and that's the idea that a lot of the people who propound these theories are really talking down to poor people. We're very clear that poor people have got agency. They understand how to spend money better than anyone else does. And frankly, by putting money directly into their hands, I actually trust the masses of any place to make the best spending decisions. Yes, you're going to have some people on the fringes who will go crazy if money is put in their hands. But by and large, people actually know how to manage their own budgets and to take care of their own lives. So I frankly don't have time for those theories. It really is people talking down to people on the ground and imposing things like minimum wages, like certain standards in terms of how houses should be constructed. Those things evolve as people get wealthier. But right now, I think give them the ability to actually make their own decisions. They surprise us, always.
If I can have a brief follow-up, what are you guys going to do with the minimum wage? Let's say you get in power and you get the opportunity to either debate that or address that. What's the view?
Abolish it.
Just completely take it away.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then getting to perhaps one last point before we can get a few questions from the audience. So you said obviously you'll be on portfolio committees, you'll be on the financial portfolio committees and the budget portfolio committees, which are important. Is there one specific piece of taxation legislation that you'll try to push or try to push to slash it in a sense? Is there a piece, I think I've read that you're quite in favor of something like VAT, because VAT is just based on people spending, but something like progressive taxation, not necessarily. Or what is your position on that?
So I follow Davy Root's examples here. You tax consumption more than you tax income or investments. So VAT is generally a good tax, no taxes are good. Let me just rephrase that. It's a better tax because it's based on people's choice, whereas something like dividend tax or transfer duty or things like that are not. So in essence, we would support taxes more in line with consumption taxes rather than taxes on income or things to that effect.
Kanthan, you want to perhaps just...
No, I think Raman's actually summarized our position very effectively. One of the more interesting things, though, if you check our 10 proposals, is the whole concept of a negative income tax. And we could probably spend hours talking about that, but I do advise people to just go out there and Google it and then take a look at how we've taken a view of applying that in our country.
To listeners perhaps that haven't heard of a negative income tax, you can just put it in a nutshell, 1, 2, 3 sentence.
Okay, the executive summary is right now we have a progressive tax system where the more you earn, the more you pay in terms of tax. So from 6,500 Rand a month is where you start paying tax. We're saying that if you earn below 6,500 Rand a month, you have a system where SARS then tops up your income. And so in other words, it's not a minimum wage, but what it is doing is putting more money into the pockets of low wage earners. And it has the very nice side effect of allowing us to become competitive with low wage industries in other countries, like textiles, for example. So you could have a scenario where the textile factories, in fact, paying their workers 1,000 Rand a month, saying, but in fact, their take-home pay ends up being about 3,250 Rand, based on the examples in our model. Obviously, this is entirely dependent on a lot of the other ways in which welfare is currently being distributed, being ripped out of the equation. But overall, we think it's a fairer system of actually providing a social security net because people are working in order to earn the money as opposed to giving them a handout. We think that people like the dignity of work, and we need to make that possible.
Cool. Let's perhaps hand over to a member of the audience for a quick question.
Right. Good evening. Adams van Zyl here. My question for you, and I would like you both to maybe answer, is, well, looking at your campaign so far, it's breaking new ground in terms of how you're using social media and especially the internet at large to get the word out there. But taking into account how few South Africans are on social media, can you just enlighten us on some of the strategies that you plan to already are using to reach people that are not necessarily that tech savvy or on social media?
Well, I mean, that's fairly simple. So social media is the best and easiest way to get an audience as such. We sort of know how it works, and it's quite easy to tweak. What we do have, however, are massive amounts of volunteers all over this country, and they've set up groups within their geographical area. We've got one in East London, Durban, where else? Cape Town, of course. And we actually send them our artwork, and we tell them, do with it what you wish. If you want to make T-shirts, you want to make posters, you want to continue with the campaign in Cape Town by hiring people to stand with our posters on the side of the street, go ahead. So we received actually a massive uptake in terms of volunteers and sort of, if you could say, influencers, but real ones in actual geographic areas. And that has done wonders for us.
I think we have one more question from the audience.
Yeah, so this is more or less the same, maybe not the same question, but what's your impression then on the impact that these real-life campaigns have had on real-life people, apart now from noise in the media and Twitter and wherever?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
If you have to rephrase the question.
Maybe, yeah. People in real life, do you meet people who have heard of the party who,
Okay, well, I think there are various pieces to this puzzle. Obviously, the most effective piece for us is anyone who becomes a fan of the party and wants to be supporting us. We just basically tell them, just go out of your way to influence as many people as you can within your immediate circles. And if each of you influences 10 people to vote for us, then we've got a winning formula. The other thing that we've been taking advantage of is that even people who don't normally spend time on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and so forth, nearly everyone has access to WhatsApp. And a lot of our guerrilla marketing techniques have involved sending very short videos to people for redistribution on WhatsApp. And nearly everyone that we can think of is a member of at least 5 or 6 different WhatsApp groups. And we've been telling them, just spread these messages as far as you possibly can. And so far, we've been finding that has been hugely effective. But a crucial thing to understand in terms of our core target market is that ultimately we're not at this stage looking to chase a mass market. Ultimately, our target market is that there are 14 million people employed in our country. Out of those 14 million people who are employed, 7.5 million people pay income tax. And they're our primary target market. Now, if you consider that in terms of social media audiences, we've got 17 million people in the country on Facebook, 14 million people on YouTube, about 8 million people on Twitter. I think that there's a fair overlap there with that 7.5 million that we specifically trying to reach, because that 7.5 million are carrying our country. They're paying the bulk of the bills. 508 billion rand, the single biggest chunk in our national budget, is contributed by those 7.5 million people. So I think at that level, we should be on track on the assumption that enough of our supporters spread the word among their friends and families.
All right, coming to some online questions now. I'm going to give you both of the questions that we currently have online. So Duffy and Gerard Groenewald both submitted questions. The first one is, in one paragraph or less, why should I change my vote from DA to ZACP? And then the second question by Gerard is, how will the ZACP deal with the stigma against capitalism and liberty generally? So those two questions. Maybe Romani, you can start.
Well, we don't like to cast aspersions on other people, but basically, an official opposition does not make one an effective one. If you look at Helen Suzman, one sole MP in front of the entire Nat party in Parliament for a number of years, and she managed to get most of what she wanted at the end of the day. 10 MPs who are, I hate to use the term, but who are activists and who understand the game plan and influence portfolio committees, and most importantly, come back every single week on a Google Hangout live stream on YouTube to report back to people who are logged in, who can be anyone in the country, by the way. Those people are far more effective than another mute DA member in the backbencher somewhere. We are 10 people who have worked in the private sector for well, some of us for decades, others for less than that.
A decade.
We solve problems every day for clients or for workers or things like that. So we know what to do. We know what we are doing. You can apply the same principles in Parliament as well.
Of course, there was more than a paragraph there, Roman. I suppose if you want a paragraph answer to the question, short answer is that if you support affirmative action, then vote for the DA. If you want to say no to affirmative action, then vote for us. If you support freedom of speech, then vote for us. If you don't, then end up voting for the DA. If you support racial quotas at any level, then vote for the DA. If you reject the concepts in total, then vote for us. Roman, you want to go through the others?
Oh, yes. Well, if you like competent gun ownership, yeah, vote for us.
Yeah, if you want your guns taken away, then vote for the DA.
And then perhaps the second question, which I think is an interesting question, because I saw on social media, it was on Twitter today or yesterday, a person said, how are these people of the ZACP so blind to not realize that capitalism brought South Africa to where it is today? And the point is, I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous, but it is a sentiment or misconception that a lot of people have in South Africa, is they believe that what we've had for the past 300 years has been capitalism or has been liberty or free markets. But it at least in my view, it hasn't been. But how will you deal with that stigma?
Well, I mean, most people in this country are capitalists. They provide value to others. They provide services. The taxi industry arose out of nowhere to fulfill the need. Township economies were booming before social grants came in. Lots of people are capitalists. If you provide value or you work for money or you charge for a service, you're a capitalist. And people inherently understand what that means. It's just a question of letting them know that that's what it means.
But doesn't the issue perhaps come in then with the role of government and people seeing government as the savior or the responsible person in the end, that the buck stops with government, or that when I'm in a bad situation, then why is government not here to help solve the problem?
I think if we go back to the question of the role of government in the entire setup, and then you contrast that with the 7.5 million people that we are targeting. I think the 7.5 million people that we are targeting do not in any way benefit from government services. They don't look to government to create jobs for them. They don't look to government to provide them with education. They don't look to government to provide them with healthcare. And they're fully aware of the fact that of the money that they earn, a significant chunk goes to government, and they get absolutely no reward from it. So if we just simply take that as a starting point, we have enough of a core audience of people who believe in our values in terms of capitalism, even if they don't want to call it capitalism. So at that level, I think those who have bought into the idea that capitalism is a bad thing, they will always be a problem. But I'm certain that our core audience actually understands what we're talking about. It is all about the money.
So I have a question that goes perhaps directly against some of your future opposition parties, and that is this. Many of your voters have been outspoken on social media that they are frustrated with the way the current system is going. And I realize that you guys want to focus on your own message and not necessarily bash opposition parties and other parties and governing parties and so forth. But I have an outright question, which I think many of the current listeners and future followers of the ZACP want to know. If we do not do something drastically, where, in your guys' opinion, will South Africa be in 10 years? So obviously you guys saw a need, and why was that? If we don't do something, what's going to happen to this country if things just go on the way they are currently going on?
Well, there's a few scenarios. So Frans Cronje of the Institute of Racial Relations has written extensively on this, and now I'm currently reading R.W. Johnson's book, the brand new one. So R.W. Johnson thinks the IMF will come bail us out and impose all sorts of restrictive conditions to liberalize the markets. Frans Cronje thinks probably balkanization will happen. So the national government will lose a lot of power, so communities will actually just take over government services and run themselves, essentially. I think long term, yes, we will become a basket case. I don't think any of the policies are that terrible, because I don't think the government can actually impose them in any meaningful way and then to enforce them in any meaningful way. But that doesn't mean that they're not dangerous. So yeah, balkanization or IMF bailouts, but yeah, IMF bailouts don't always work. Argentina has had 13, I think, in the past 2 decades, and it's still a basket case.
I tend to think that we're still quite away from the point of total collapse, because if you consider right now in terms of our budget, our national debt right now is sitting at just over 3 trillion rand. I think it crossed that point about 4 weeks ago or so. We're currently paying out something like R1 billion a day in interest payments to on that money that we borrowed. Now, on the one hand, this might sound like it's actually something quite horrendous, and how are we ever going to extricate ourselves from it? But on the other hand, if you consider that out of every 100 rand that we raise in tax, we have essentially the government paying the public service wage bill 34 rand out of that. So if we can drastically slash the size of government, we immediately have a solution to all our problems in this country. So government is the problem. It's not that we have a non-productive country. It's just that we are spending money that we should not be spending to sustain a government that we don't need. And I think that's the single biggest message that we need to get out there right now, that government is the problem. We need to drastically downsize that government. And then suddenly we have a winning nation again. Just imagine if we had that extra 34% of our budget to actually spend it on real service delivery. What an amazing country we'd have.
So I have another question from the live stream chat section. It's from one of the directors also of Podmedia, Dirk Skeppert, who's all the way from New York chatting and listening in. Dirk asks a specific question and a humorous question. He phrases it as for Roman. He says, how does an avowed anarcho-capitalist join a political process by being a representative for a political party? What has changed, Roman? I think we've also discussed this, actually.
Right. Well, I mean, it's very simple, right? You can fill in a bath using a cap, but the bath has a massive hole in it and it drains out. You can do that from the outside all the time. Or you can get in the bath and fix the hole. So, excuse me, politics essentially is the primary way to change this country. And if I could use every skill I have as an anarchist to do so, to infiltrate and to change it from within, it's far better than shouting on the outside of the walls of Jericho and wanting them to come down.
And then I think we have one more question from the audience, so you can gladly step up.
Yeah. Hi guys, thanks for taking the time. My name is Andries Oendal. I've got 2 questions, if I may. One, I know Adrian Bosson on News 24 today said that you guys might be a party to keep an eye on. But have you guys done any sort of internal polling or have seen the results of polling of institutions that might indicate that you might get a seat or two in Parliament? And if so, how many seats are you hoping to get in Parliament? And the second question, I know you guys are only contesting the national elections this year, but come the next national election, will you guys consider taking part in the provincial elections? And even as soon as 2021, are you guys considering taking part in the local elections as well?
You want to go first?
So this party are we even a month old?
3 weeks old.
We're 3 weeks old. There's no polling data that exists for us. A lot of people have sent me polling data. You don't even represent it in this polling data. I said, yes, it was taken before the party came into existence. So of course we are not represented. No, we have no polling data whatsoever. If we look at the traction and in terms of the structures we set up online for people to join and to discuss forums and to volunteer, it's been a really great response. We've got thousands and thousands and thousands of people helping us out, and a lot of people donating to the party as well. So no polling, but traction has been good. And secondly, we are looking for 10 seats for 10 candidates to go into 10 portfolio committees.
If we consider that in the last election, there were 7 million registered voters who just couldn't be bothered to go out to the polls. And we took the view that in order to get the 10 of us into Parliament, we just need about 450,000 votes. Now, in a country where you have, close to 27 million registered voters, Roman, you might think that that's not a big ask. But to put this in perspective, 10 seats is roughly what the IFP currently has. And they're the fourth biggest party in Parliament. So at that level, it's a huge ask. The question really is whether the messaging that we have is going to be able to influence maybe 5% of those 7 million people who didn't bother to get out of bed and vote in the last election to say, I didn't go and vote last time because there was nothing I could believe in. But maybe these guys are saying something that I believe in and that resonates with me and speaks to my interests, and I'm willing to get out of bed and actually go and put my cross next to them. And I think it's a leap of faith for us. We take the view that there's a significant chunk of us who love our country, really, and we have this huge sense of frustration about the fact that we actually are some of the smartest people in the world. We know how to fix things. We've done brilliant stuff in our individual capacity, and we have government that's a basket case. And so this is a shot at actually saying, let's go and play in that space and make a difference. Question of what happens from there in terms of the next elections. Look, frankly, we're not at that stage of thinking about that yet. One of the things we need to understand is that the perspective in terms of municipal elections and in terms of provincial elections is very different from the national parliament. The national parliament is all about ideas, it's all about policy, it's all about the actual direction. Provincial and municipality is all about actually delivering services to people on the ground. Those areas, as we've seen already in Johannesburg and up in Pretoria, have become already places that are run by coalitions, and that's increasingly going to be the future of the country. There's a very strong chance, in my opinion, that Gauteng will be run by a coalition come the next election. I certainly hope so. Personally, I'll be voting for the DA in the province because I think from an administrative point of view, they're significantly better than the others. But do we want to be playing in that space? No, I don't think so. We're not there to be provincial administrators. We're not there to be municipal managers. We are there to actually provide real solutions at a macro level. And I think that that's where our role is going to come in. Obviously, as our branch structure expands, we might well have people who want to take on that challenge. But frankly, both of us are very strong in terms, well, I think all of us really, the 10 candidates, feel very strongly that the smaller you devolve the units of responsibility in terms of government, the better the country runs. So municipalities, I think, are actually run far better if you have political parties that are started in those municipalities that look to run those cities, because they understand very clearly what the needs are at that level. Roman, you want to add to that?
No, all that. I just agree with you completely.
And then perhaps just to end off this conversation, a lot of people, obviously, they follow on social media, they tune in to listen to your videos and your podcasts, but what else can people do to get involved, to join you guys, to help the party come 8 May?
Well, the single biggest thing that they can do is give us money. Seriously, I mean, we funded all of this stuff ourselves. We certainly haven't been doing a BLF thing where we go around and say how picked on we are because of the fact that we don't have access to money. No,
and no Russian funding.
No Russian funding. No white monopoly capital. No black monopoly capital. None of that stuff. We dipped into our own pockets and we've invested our own time in this. And we've done as well as we have just simply because we understand the digital environment. But to reach out to a larger group of people, we do need to invest in traditional media. We do need to spend money on buying radio ads, for example. And obviously, we're looking at radio ads in spaces where it's targeting those 7.5 million people that we're trying to reach. And we need money for that. So go to capitalist.org.za/donate and, whip out your credit card or do an EFT or use PayPal if you want to. And all of it counts because ultimately, all of the money that we raise there is going directly into our marketing to spread our message.
Yeah, and importantly, all donations are public. So if you go to capitalist.org.za/donate, you can see the total of amount of money that has come in, and you can see the initials and the names of the people who have donated to us, anywhere from 200 Rand to one has given 10,000 Rand, for example. But the average is between 200 to 400 Rand, roughly. But even 50 Rand, if 1,000 people give us 50 Rand, we are more than happy with that.
All right. So where can people reach you? Obviously, we know that social media is a large part of your marketing campaigns. So give us all the deets, if I can use millennial language. Where can people follow you, both of you guys personally as well as the party? And then what should they look out for running up to 8th May? Any big functions, anything we should be on the lookout for?
Well, we try to do as many small town halls as we possibly can. We're very happy to actually do really personal get-togethers with people who put together groups of maybe 20, 30 people, and we're very happy to go along and meet them face to face and talk to them about what it is that we do. We've been doing a lot of those. I did one in Saxonwold last week where there was about 30 people who gathered in a house, and guy basically opened up his bar and put some meat on the braai, and I did a presentation and took questions, and that went on for about 3 hours. And we came out of that. There's 30 people out there who are going to actually go out, and hopefully each of them is going to tell at least 10 of their friends and family to come on board. So we're very happy to do that type of thing. In terms of getting access to us online, our website capitalist.org.za, easiest place, and there's a Get Involved tab out there that tells you how to get to all the other places.
All right, fantastic. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. And to you as listener, thank you for spending the time here, getting to know the Capitalist Party a bit better. We hope you enjoyed this episode. The Deaf Taxes and Change podcast is proudly brought to you by Podmedia, and you can follow us on Twitter and on Facebook.